Hey guys, I'm Clint Pascal, lead pastor of the Waters Church. The Waters Church, what is the Waters Church? Guys, we're a church where you don't have to hide your tattoos, where the pastors aren't that impressed with themselves, and where you don't have to pretend to be better than you really are. So here you are, you're checking out one of our messages. Guys, these messages are based on biblical truth. Don't ever take any of our word for it. Do your own stuff. Do your own testing. This is biblical stuff and truth that will lead your heart to freedom. And our goal here is always the same, just to push people a little closer and closer to Jesus Christ. And man, the closer you get to Him, the more free your heart's going to be. Hey, thanks so much for checking us out. Today, Jordan McClinton, our own version of Indiana Jones, is going to be doing a presentation for you. And here's what is not going to happen. We're not going to do something so that we can have a cute little presentation and make you understand why he does some weird things in the dirt on the other side of the world. There's a singular purpose for today. Look at me, listen. The single purpose is that your faith grows, period. When your faith gets stronger, amazing things happen to your spiritual discipleship. This is intended to increase your faith. Raise your hand if you would like for your faith to get stronger. Raise your hand. So I assume, keep your hands up, I assume that what you're saying is that your faith right now could use some muscle. Jordan, work us out. Jordan McClinton, everybody.
Thanks, Clint. Thank you, guys. So as Clint said, I'm Jordan McClinton. I'm one of the associate pastors here. You guys just saw me up here leading worship, which is one of my passions in life, leading you guys in worship. But I also have another passion that the Lord has led me on over the past year and a half or so, and that is biblical history, really is where it began, which led me into this beautiful thing called archaeology. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. I know the last time I stood up and spoke to you guys, I was talking about stepping into faith, and part of it for me was stepping into this thing called graduate school. As I pursued a master's of biblical history and archaeology from the Bible Seminary here in Katy, Texas, and so this is kind of where I wanted to then come back and talk to you guys and kind of just update you on where I've been, what I've been doing. I have had the opportunity over the past 2 years to visit Israel 3 times now. I returned back a couple weeks ago. I guess about a month and a half ago or so, on my last trip. And the Lord made it very clear, Jordan, it is now time to share this information. I've given you this. I want you to steward it well and to share this with your church family, with people, because that's why I'm doing this, to increase people's faith and to ultimately lead people to a saving knowledge of Jesus. So that kind of brings me to the question that a lot of people ask me, Jordan, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because it's cool? Yeah, it's cool. Are you doing this because you like to dig in the dirt? Yes, I do like to dig in the dirt, but ultimately it is so that I can understand this book better. This is the journey that God has been taking me on, to understand His Word as a historical document, but also as truth, and share that with people, share that with you guys. Because the people of this Bible, the people that we read in this, the stories that we read, are actual people. They lived actual lives, they lived in actual places, they did things, they raised families, and for us here in the Waters Church in the year 2020, it is important for us to understand that so that we can gain context. Context is everything when it comes to understanding Bible, our faith, how we apply it today, and understanding the history of that, understanding God's people, how He brought them out of bondage, how they relate to God. This is all extremely important for us as Christians in 2020 to understand. So, we're going to talk about biblical archaeology today. So what is biblical archaeology? Well, I have a definition for you. So let's read it together. Biblical archaeology is not set out to prove or disprove the biblical text, but instead to investigate the material culture of the land and the time periods mentioned in the Bible, and the people, places, and events discussed in those ancient texts in order to illuminate the culture and history of the land of the Bible. So there has been a battle that has been going on for the Bible for decades. We see it in our universities, we see it in our public schools, we see it when we talk about things like creation versus evolution. This battle for the truth of the Bible, what I would refer to as the veracity of the biblical text. And it makes sense that a skeptical world would want to discredit this book. Discredit a book that has a lot of truth in it, that sometimes is very hard to live out, very hard to stomach sometimes. It makes sense that a skeptical world would try in every corner to discredit this book, discredit the historicity of the book, the actual events. And many people want to explain the events of this book as fable and fairy tale. So this morning, we're going to touch briefly on some biblical stories, starting with the Exodus and going through Joshua's conquest, because a lot of my studies, a lot of the organization that I work with, the Associates for Biblical Research, this is where a lot of their research and study has begun, and where we continue to do our work. So let's talk about the Exodus. We probably all remember the story of the Israelites exiting Egypt. They left Egypt. I'm sure we've all seen the movie, The Ten Commandments, Charlton Heston. Well, these events actually happened, and there is archaeological proof that these actually happened. In the year 1446 BC, the Israelites lived in a palatial district of the northern Nile Delta in a city called Avaris. You read this in your Bible as the city of Ramesses, but the name before that was Avaris. And just like the Bible says that the Israelites exited, they left Egypt. God sent plagues to Egypt, to Pharaoh. They crossed the Red Sea. They went to Mount Sinai. God gave Moses the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. And because of their disobedience and their grumbling, God sent them into the wilderness for 40 years to wander. They wandered around for 40 years. They carried their tents. They carried the Ark of the Covenant. They set up. They tore down. They wandered for 40 years. After 40 years, the year 1406, Moses and the Israelites are camping by Mount Nebo. Moses dies, and Joshua and the Israelites cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, the promised land. And as God commanded them, as he had given them this land as their inheritance, and he commanded them, the first three cities that you come across, the first three cities that you attack, I want you to completely destroy. And I want to invite you guys back next week. Clint is going to preach on first fruits. We just talked about giving, offering, tithing, the idea of the king's portion, or the first fruits, or our offering to God. We're going to talk about that a little bit today, but come back next week. Clinton has an amazing presentation, a sermon focused on that. But that's what God told the Israelites. Remember, this is their inheritance. This is what God promised them through the covenant of Abraham, that this land will be yours. And he told them, you're going to live in cities that you did not construct. You're going to live in homes that you did not build. So it was not advantageous for them to destroy these cities. Do not live in them. Do not take any of the spoils. Completely burn them to the ground. So the first two sites that they came across, you guys probably know the site of Jericho, the story of the Israelites marching around the walls, blowing their horns until the walls came crumbling down, and taking the city. The second site was the site of Ai. You may read it in your Bible as Ai. In Hebrew, it's actually pronounced I. But this was the second site that was conquered and destroyed by the Israelites. So in the 1950s, a woman by the name of Kathleen Kenyon excavated at a site called Tel El Sultan, which is the ancient site of Jericho. After 8 seasons of excavation, she announced to the world that archaeology contradicts the Bible. She declared to the world that the Bible cannot be trusted. And as you can imagine, there was a media frenzy, a skeptical world who grabbed hold of this and believed it. Additionally, in the 1960s, a man named Joseph Calloway came to dig at a site called Et Tel, which he believed to be the site of the biblical site of Ai, the second destruction site. And once again, his claim was that the biblical timeline did not align with archaeology. And once again, announced to the world that the Bible cannot be trusted. Guys, do you see the problem that we as Christians have here? If the first 2 battles of the conquest are false, then everything else that we know starts to fall apart. If we lose Jericho and we lose Ai, then we lose the conquest completely. And if we don't have a conquest, then we don't have a historical Old Testament. So can you start to see how a skeptical world might latch on to this? All right? Okay. That was so flippant. Don't worry about it. It's an Amber Alert. Please pay attention to your Amber Alerts. So guys, you can see how this battle is an extremely important thing for us as Christians to engage with. To not let a skeptical world take something and completely run with it. We should, as Christians, Christian educators, Christian scientists, Christian archaeologists, Christian teachers, be doing the hard work to make sure we're holding these skeptics accountable. Holding them accountable, going the extra mile to put in the extra work. We should not be putting our heads in the sand and pretending like this doesn't exist and just accepting them. So this is the original reason why the organization that I work for, or work with, the Associates for Biblical Research, was formed. For 40 years, they have been reanalyzing the work of these archaeologists. They've been doing their own excavations in the land of the Holy Land. And for the past 25 years, ABR has been spent digging at a site named Khirbet El Maqader. And guys, there's some very exciting stuff. And the dig director, my professor, the excavation director, Dr. Scott Stripling is here, and he would tell you the same thing. Some exciting things are coming out very, very soon. In the next probably 6 months to a year, what we refer to as our final publication, kind of the public offering of all the findings over the past 25 years is coming out very soon, which is going to open up a whole can of worms to the archaeological community, because we are thoroughly convinced that this is in fact the biblical site of Ai, and it aligns very nicely with the biblical timeline of the Exodus and conquest, which contradicts Joseph Calloway's claims on Et Tel. Additionally, a brilliant archaeologist by the name of Dr. Bryant Wood has spent many years re-examining Kenyon's findings at Jericho. His accurate dating of a large section of pottery from the site has concluded that her dating was fairly misguided, and that there is actually, in fact, an overwhelming amount of evidence that points to the Israelites destroying Jericho exactly when the Bible states it did. So let's continue on with the conquest. So we have Jericho, we have Ai. Both sites have been conquered by the Israelites. And God tells them, once you gain a foothold in the land, once you have both of these sites destroyed and conquered, I want you to go and renew covenant with me at Shechem. So in Joshua 8, then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the sons of Israel. As it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stone on which no man had wielded an iron tool, and they offered burnt offerings to it to the Lord, and sacrificed peace offerings. He wrote there on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written in the presence of the sons of Israel. All Israel, with their elders and officers and their judges, were standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant to the Lord, the stranger as well as the native. Half of them stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them stood in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first to bless the people of Israel. So half stood on Mount Ebal, half stood on Mount Gerizim. So here on your left, we see Mount Gerizim, and Mount Ebal is on your right. And in between is the city of Shechem, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was during this time. So the Mount of blessing being on your left, Mount Gerizim, the Mount of curse on the right. If you remember in the verse that I just read, God told Joshua to build an altar on Ebal. Mount Ebal was the Mount of curses, which makes sense. We need an altar. We need a sacrifice. We need atonement on the altar of curses. It wouldn't make any sense if it was the altar of blessing. So it would make sense that we would find an altar somewhere on Mount Ebal. Well, in the 1980s, there was a man by the name of Adam Zertal who was surveying the area and came across an Israelite site on the north side of Mount Ebal. And after further excavation, he came across a large square altar as they were excavating the site. As you can see here, it was of uncut stone. It was similar to the description of the altar that is described in the Bible. Here's an overview picture of it here. The issue was that the dating of this large structure dated to a few hundred years after the Bible stated that Joshua would have constructed this, around 1200 BC, where we would have expected it to be around 1400 BC. Well, as he continued excavating this, as he continued going down, he uncovered what was a round altar. You can see with the red circle there, right in the center of this large altar, which was interesting because it dated exactly to the time that Joshua would have been on Mount Ebal building an altar. So they found this round altar in the exact center, the geometric center of this large altar. Here's another picture, kind of an artist's rendering of it. You can see the altar up there. It would have been down below. But this would have been the altar that Joshua actually built. And it's not uncommon to find this sort of veneration of a site in ancient times where an altar was built, an original altar, and it was used for centuries. And then a later inhabitant came by and built a larger altar on top of that in order to preserve and venerate the site and to continue using it and not destroy it. So this is the altar, Joshua's altar on Mount Ebal. And I won't get into a lot of detail, but the project that I came back from this past winter was the research and the investigation of this was the scope of that project when I was in Israel last winter, a couple months ago. So let's continue on. After Joshua and the Israelites renewed covenant with the Lord, they finished their initial campaign of the land. They settled in a place called Shiloh. Joshua 18:1 says, "Then the whole congregation of the sons of Israel assembled themselves at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and the land was subdued before them." Shiloh essentially was the first capital of Israel. Once they settled in the city, the Israelites set up their then mobile tabernacle that they carried around with them, the wilderness for 40 years. This was the location of the Ark of the Covenant. It was here in this location for 369 years. Here's a nice aerial photo of it. So this is the site that we are currently working on. We just finished over this last summer our third season at Shiloh. We are preparing for our fourth season. And I'm preparing for my trip coming up in May and June. I will be there for 2 weeks digging. And this is actually my professor, academic advisor, the provost of the Archaeological Institute at the Bible Seminary here in Katy, Dr. Scott Stripling. He's the guy with the long, luscious hair over there, the purple shirt. If you guys want to talk to somebody just who will blow you away, talk to this man. He's phenomenal. This is also the site, if you remember, you read in Samuel, this is the site of Hannah when she comes to the tabernacle, to the Lord, praying for a son. She's barren. She can't have a child. She prays. She says, God, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to you. He gives Hannah a son. She names him Samuel, and Samuel becomes the first prophet of Israel. He anoints King Saul, anoints King David. Just an amazing story of God's provision. This happened at Shiloh. So for the remaining time that we have, I want to talk about a few parallels that we have found at Shiloh, and hopefully continue to encourage you and continue to increase your faith that these stories that we read in the Bible are true, and digging things up out of the ground, these past civilizations absolutely increase our faith as we learn more about them. So, some exciting parallels that I want to show you. First, so this is a priestly city, right? The tabernacle was here. This was similar to Jerusalem. Later on, this is where the temple is built in Jerusalem. People travel from all over to come and sacrifice here at Shiloh. They come and bring offerings. Every year, this is where they come and the Day of Atonement, they're sacrificed for their sins. So similar to what we talked about, people bring offerings. They bring first fruit offerings. They'll bring grain. They will bring fruit and vegetables, things for the priests to live off of. And then, of course, they would bring animals to sacrifice as well. So you would think as we are excavating this site that we would find parallels that would connect to a priestly site, a site that the tabernacle stood. Well, if you look around the edge, so you can kind of see the wall. It's like a big semicircle. Part of it is not excavated yet, but you can see some down on the right, and then over here, this on the left side is our current excavation. Well, you find something interesting that you don't find at a lot of sites. You find not in habitation. You don't find houses. A lot of the times you will find homes that are built against the wall because part of their wall is already built. They don't have to build a fourth wall, so they'll build their house there. But what you find here are an overwhelming amount of storage rooms. You don't find this in any other site in Israel. You don't find just an abundance of storage rooms. And so this makes perfect sense that a site that is directly connected to the priest, directly connected to the tabernacle, that would have just hundreds of thousands of people coming every year, bringing things as offerings, they would need a place to store those. So finding storage rooms was a really good connection to the biblical narrative. Second, and we didn't actually uncover this, but it is a very fascinating connection. Over here on the right, this was uncovered, excavated in the 80s, but they found it's essentially a dump. You find it's called a favisa, but you find a lot of these dumps in many cities. Pottery, all kinds of stuff you would dump. You find out a lot of stuff when you dig through somebody's trash. Well, here we found a bone dump. It was a dump that was filled with bones of animals, which again connects to the idea that people are coming here and sacrificing. so much so that you have to dump the animals over the edge. But what you find in these bones is very interesting. We have zoo archaeologists that are on staff with us that analyze all of our bones. They can tell you which animal it came from. They can tell you what part of the body it came from. It's very fascinating. So the type of bone that we find is very important to understand. And so, if we found an overwhelming amount of pig bone in these dumps, then we would probably conclude that this was not an Israelite inhabitant, because for one, they don't eat pig. They definitely wouldn't sacrifice pig for the atonement of their sin. You want to guess how many pig bone we found in this dump? 0. No pig bone. Almost completely absent of pig bone. And one of the most interesting things about this is a good portion of these bones actually came from the right side of the animal. And I want to read Leviticus to you. The priest is to burn the fat of the altar, but the breast belongs to Aaron and his sons, the priest. And you are to give the right thigh to the priest as a contribution from your peace offering. The son of Aaron who presents the blood and fat of the peace offering shall have the right thigh as his portion. So again, guys, just a beautiful connection of the biblical narrative that we're finding right in the ground. And again, this connects to the priest portion, so shameless plug. Come back next week and hear from Clint about the priest portion, about the giving your first fruits. So in the year 2018, so every year Israel comes out with the top 10 most important discoveries each year. In 2018, we made number 4 on the list. Shiloh made number 4 from something that was found right around there. We have found a few things right there. And I want to read a portion of, actually, I'm sorry, I've got a picture of this. It's actually a clay pomegranate. And this may seem insignificant, and it may actually not look like a pomegranate, but it is in fact a pomegranate, a young pomegranate. You see these hanging on the trees. It was made of clay. It's got a little hole in the top that was probably used as a decoration of some sort. In Exodus 39, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially the first portion, then he made the robe of the ephod of woven work of blue, and then the opening of the robe was at the top in the center, as the opening of the coat of mail, with a binding all around its opening so that it would not be torn. They made pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet material and twisted linen on the hem of the robe. They also made bells of pure gold and put the bells between the pomegranates all around the hem of the robe. So guys, the pomegranate, it's a priestly motif. This is something that the priests had on their garments. This is something that you would have found all over the tabernacle as decoration. It represents the priest. Again, another very strong connection to the Bible. Last year, just this last summer, we made number 2 on the list, which, guys, is pretty impressive. Number 2 on the top 10 discoveries of 2019. And this one's very exciting. We found a corner, we found a couple of them, but we found a corner of a horned altar. So in the Bible, we read about the altar of the Lord, where the sacrifices were done on in the tabernacle. It was done on a 4-horned altar. Here's a picture of one that's more complete, but this is what it would look like. And we found a corner of that, again, right there in that little section. Which again, it just brings to life the biblical narrative and just connects this site that much more to a site where the tabernacle was. And my last connection that I want to show here, and I'm going to be I promise, Dr. Stripling, I'll be very careful with my words. I was been told, do not make any wild claims here. This is literally just conjecture, and this is something that we're going to look into next season and continue to excavate around here. But I want you to remember where this is found. Those two very connected to the tabernacle would have been found. And right next to it, we find these interesting walls. I know it's hard to see. I'm going to kind of flip back and forth. If you go to Shiloh today and you ask where the foundation of the tabernacle was, they'll take you kind of off outside of the city walls, and they'll show you a little square area. It may have been one of the locations that it was at one point, but there's most likely the foundation of the tabernacle was inside of the wall, at least at some point. And so as we were uncovering this, there's a little section that you can see, but then last summer we uncovered these sections over here. These sections over here that are closer to on the other side of the road here. This is what we would refer to as a monumental building. Something that's larger than just a storage room. It's not a home. It's something big that we're going to focus a little bit of our interest on in the next coming season, which could be very interesting as we uncover that, and I'll keep you guys up to date. So that's what I have this morning. And guys, again, my hope was that as I am learning this, as I God's giving me opportunity to be involved in this, that I can come back and bring this to you guys as we talk individually. I know a lot of you guys I've shared some of this stuff with. A lot of you have supported me as I continue this work. And my hope, ultimately, as Clint mentioned, is to strengthen our faith as a church, strengthen our faith as Christians in this book for one purpose, so that people would understand who Jesus Christ is. People would understand our desperate need for Jesus Christ. And if we read the Old Testament, we read these stories, we read this historical account, we see time and time again our desperate need for a Savior in our lives. So if I have done all of this for my entire life and one person understands the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, then it would be all worth it for me. So this morning, as we have a few minutes left, I want to offer this time as an opportunity to respond as we normally do in our church, as we normally have time in the back for prayer, for decisions. If you want to know more kind of about this, if you don't know who Jesus is and you just want to understand him a little bit better, we want to give you that opportunity. So right now I'm going to ask you guys to stand up. And this is going to just be a short time of response. Our prayer team, like normal, is going to be in the back. Again, use this time. If you want to say, this makes no sense, and I just wanted to tell you this, then go talk to somebody. If you want to make a decision for Jesus, if you want to join this church, if you want to pray with somebody, there are people in the back, and I want you guys to have this opportunity.